Hi everyone, good afternoon. I'm Ulrich, Obrist, Artistic Director of Serpentine, and together with Bettina Korek, our CEO, and all our teams, we are super delighted to welcome you all to a capsule in time, the 2025 Serpentine Pavilion, designed by the amazing Marina Tabassum and her Dhaka-based firm, Marina Tabassum Architects. We are joined today by Marina in conversation, and before we start, please give Marina a very, very warm welcome. There could not be a more beautiful day, really, to celebrate the pavilion and have the first public event here in this time capsule Marina design. Before we begin, a few thank yous. The Serpentine Pavilion has become one of the most anticipated architectural commissions in the world, and this year actually marks its 25th anniversary. It all began when Julia Peyton-Johns invited Zaha Hadid, the late Zaha Hadid, to design the first pavilion. And I think the Pavilion of Marina very much is in the spirit of what Zaha taught us when she says that there should never ever be an end to experimentation. What is exciting is this is the first time Marina actually has built outside Bangladesh. We are very delighted that she has accepted this invitation. On behalf of our chairman, Mike Bloomberg, and the trustees, I want to again thank Marina. We are, of course, very deeply grateful to all our supporters whose commitment actually to our mission to build connections between art and audiences allows us to build these pavilions, but also to keep them open with free admission. As you can see, these structures never have doors. This one is particularly open and inviting everyone to come in and basically give a short talk for Art for All. This is kind of architecture for all. And this, of course, is also made possible by Goldman Sachs, who for the 11th year in a row have actually agreed to basically support and sponsor this pavilion and allow us to do the scheme. We also want to express our deepest gratitude to Qatar Museums, especially to Her Excellency Sheikh Al-Mayasa bin Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani for the exceptional commitment to the Serpentine Pavilion 2025. And of course, we are very grateful to Malak Hassan, who is with us. Thank you for being with us here today. We want to also thank our newest trustee, Eugenio Lopez, who has supported the pavilion, our international council members, Esha and Robin Arora, and the Graham Foundation. We could never have done this without you. It's been also a pleasure, of course, as always, to work with our technical advisors, with AECOM, as well as Stage 1 Creative Services on the infrastructure and engineering that allows us to build reality, and we want to extend our deepest appreciation also to many more collaborators. It really does take a village to build a pavilion, to Weil, Gallo Glass Health, Safety, Zumtobel, Tarn, DP9, the technical department, and also our consultant, David Glover. A key of the Serpentine's activity is, of course, to bring art into the park, and we are very deeply grateful to Kenneth Griffin, who is the lead supporter of Art in the Park. This summer, you can, after seeing the pavilion, see our exhibition of Benone and also see the sculptures Giuseppe Benone has created for the park. And we are, as always, very grateful to Bloomberg Philanthropies, to Arts Council England, and the Royal Parks for their continued support. I want to also acknowledge the presence of our amazing trustee, Nicoletta Fiorucci, who is with us here. It's a great honor to welcome Nicoletta and express our deepest gratitude to the Serpentine Dream Team, especially Julie Burnell, Director of Construction and Special Projects. This is Julie's 18th pavilion. And of course to Chris Bailey for the brilliant curation of this year's pavilion. Thanks go to Kostas Stasinopoulos, Curator of Live Program, to Isabel Peyton-Johns, producer, and Andy Downey, Production Manager, who have put today's talk together. And there will, of course, also be a book, a publication published by Walter Koenig and Franz Koenig, designed by Wolf Hall, and actually several of the authors of the publication are here with us. Marina has so many admirers and writers and architects who all will contribute to this book. Pervin Hassan, who is here, Deborah Berg, Thomas de Moncho, Shumon Bazar, Rana Begum, Naim Mohaimen, Ivan Ban, and David Chipperfield all contribute to this publication, which is about to come out. We hope to welcome you many, many times this summer, because the pavilion, as every year, is also a content machine. A lot of things happen here. It's not only that basically visitors can come here from early in the morning. It's always very fascinating. I always go jogging in the morning, and already when I come jogging here at 6:37, there are many, many people actually jogging here. So, and lots of other use of the pavilion is invented by the visitors, which we cannot predict. Then, of course, there is also the program, things we do program here. The Park Night series, curated by Claude Arch, will happen on Friday. And then, of course, there is also special projects. For example, this year, for the first time, a collaboration with Arik Chen and the Zaha Hadid Foundation. And if you want to know more about these programs, you can see it on our website, but you can also download the app Bloomberg Connects, where you will find lots of background information actually about our program, and also background information on the way this pavilion was built. But now it's the moment to actually begin the conversation with Marina Tabassum, and maybe we can give Marina another very warm welcome. So Marina, I always think with Vasia and Ada that maybe it's good to begin with the beginning. And it was really wonderful the other day to meet your father for the first time, who is in his late 80s and who specially traveled from Bangladesh, to London. It was an extremely moving moment. And your father has played a very, very central role at the beginning of you becoming an architect, because as a doctor, you saw the care he took, and you saw the way he was with many, many patients every day, and you somehow wanted to translate that into architecture. So can you tell us a little bit about that and the beginnings, and how you came to architecture, or how architecture came to you?
Right. Well, thank you, Hans. Thank you all for being here today. Well, to start with the beginning, I grew up in a war-torn, war-ravaged country in Bangladesh. It was in 1971 that we had this sort of a bloody war, after which Bangladesh became a sovereign nation. And I was around 2 years old at that time, and then grew up in my formative years where within that situation where we were growing up with a lot of uncertainties, but also minimal means in that sense. But at the same time, my father, who is a doctor, is an oncologist, but at that very moment where we were living in Dhaka, that's where I'm born, that's where I'm brought up, and exactly in that location in our neighborhood, we had these two different situations where our family, being of a certain privilege in terms of, let's say, finances and also education, had the possibility of going to school. But at the same time, there was, right next to us was a slum, and that was a rickshaw puller's slum. And that's a kind of a reality that we grew up with, knowing that we were privileged and there was a certain group of people who were not so privileged. And quite often, especially waking up in the morning, you'd see a long line of people waiting to be treated by my father, because he was the only doctor in the neighborhood. So everybody would come to him with fevers or cough, whatever. And before going to his work, he would always treat them. And if he had medicine, he would give it to them. If not, he would prescribe or something. So I've always seen him take up this role as someone who is sort of trying to give back to the society in a certain way. And so in a way, of course, I didn't know at that point I'm becoming an architect. I didn't even know what architecture was all about. It was not a profession that you know much about. And I come from a family where everybody is either a doctor or an engineer. So I grew up knowing that I would have to become either a doctor or an engineer. And I wasn't interested in any of those. I always loved to draw. I had a very active imagination, and I liked making things on my own. And at the moment when, after high school, when you actually have to decide what would you like to study, and that's the point where, I was kind of confused, what do I do? And it was actually my father who suggested that, why don't you try architecture? And we had only one school at that point in time in Bangladesh which offered architecture, the Bangladesh University of Engineering and Technology. And we had 50 seats in that school for the entire of Bangladesh. And there was more than 400 students who would sit for an entrance exam, and through that exam you would get one of the seats. So which means I had to really work hard to be able to get one of those 50 seats. And that was the time when I actually started looking into what architecture is. And then I found there were about 2 or 3 months that I really had to work hard and to sort of draw and learn more about architecture. More and more I tried to know about it, the more I felt like this is it. There's nothing else for me. I mean, this is my answer. And so I really worked hard. And I set for the exam, and I became first in the exam, which was quite nice. So among 4,000 students. So in a way, that was a glorious way of entering into architecture. But then after graduation, that's where the dilemma came in, that, you know, I've seen my father in a certain position where he was, you know, at least serving the society in a certain way. As an architect, how do you do that? So that became a lifelong question. We could answer that maybe later.
Yeah, a very important question. And of course, it would be interesting also, as we talk about the beginnings, to maybe hear a little bit who are the architects who inspired you. I came to Dhaka for the first time in 2016. That's also when I saw your work for the first time, came across images also of your work for the first time. And of course, I visited there the Parliament of Cannes, which made a very deep impression on me, as on everyone who visits it. And I suppose, particularly in relation to light, Cannes was a big influence. But then there is also an architect who is maybe less known here, Muzaffar Islam, who was very important for you, who designed actually the Institute of Fine Arts in Dhaka in the 50s. And it's, as you once told me, it's a unique and modern response to the tropical climate. And you were also particularly interested how he thought beyond buildings, because he wanted to think about an entire country with farmlands and cities. It was a kind of a dream. Can you tell us a little bit about these early influences and what you learned from Cannes, and particularly also what you learned from Muzaffar Islam and Muzaffar Islam's dream?
Yeah, for sure. Well, you know, as I think even before going into architecture, I saw the Parliament building getting built, and it took quite some time because Cannes started the project in 1964, and then it went into construction. And then we ended up in the war. So in 71, the building wasn't finished. So it was almost like a, you know, construction site for quite some time. And then in 74, he passed. But then the building construction went on. So I grew up seeing that building as a construction site until and unless it finished, I think in the 80s, early 80s, in 81 or so. And for the very first time, one of my friend's father was an engineer working in that building. And I was still in high school at that point. I wasn't in architecture. And so we had the possibility of going into the building and seeing it. And I was fascinated, but I've never seen anything like that ever in my life. So to see the light coming through that ambulatory space between all the floors, and it was amazing, the light that's coming through. And I think my inspiration towards light started from that building coming forward from that point on. So I think the building has become an inspiration for me in many ways. How you deal with light in terms of space and how you actually design somebody's feelings as one goes through spaces was something, you know, I think I learned from that building. But at the same time, I think I should start from my school days, actually. One of my Professor Shamsul Waris, who, you know, taught us as a, you know, from first year onwards. So my design, I would say my ABCD in architecture, I learned from him, actually. So, you know, whatever language I created was, you know, he had a lot to do with that. And then encountering Muzaffar Islam while we were designing a museum, the Museum of Independence and the Monument to Independence of Bangladesh, which was a competition we won very early in our practice. I was 27, 28 years of age at that time when we had the commission to design a museum. And he was absolutely very instrumental in the sense that, you know, being one of the earliest, I would say the first architect of Bangladesh, because he was not trained in Bangladesh. We didn't have a school of architecture at that point in the early 50s. So he went to the US, he got trained in the US. in Oregon University. Then he studied at Yale. He also did some, I think, maybe his master's also at AA School back here in London. And so he got trained in the West and then went back to Bangladesh. And his first building was actually in the 1953 when it was built, the Fine Art Institute. One of the first, let's say, modern building, and in a very tropical setting, very contextual modern building in the Indian subcontinent. So that building, till date, is one of the best buildings that we have in the city of Dhaka. And Mazharul Islam was also instrumental in bringing Louis Kahn, Paul Rudolph, Stanley Tigerman, many of these architects to Bangladesh to build buildings in the 50s and in the 60s. So he, being such a senior architect, and we were very young at that point in time when we were designing the museum, we had a lot of conversations, and I think his influence is also a very important part of my becoming an architect. And at the same time, Bashirul Haq is also one of the architects whom I really, really admire his work and his way of working with local language, local material, working around courtyards. I think those are beautiful, also responding to the climate. The other architect I really admire is Qazi Khalid Ashraf. He's more an educator and I would say a philosopher writer who has actually showed me in many ways how this whole delta really works. And we are a delta at the end. I mean, we were trained very much in the school where I was trained. It was a very American curriculum because it was based on Texas A&M's curriculum. So basically, it was a very Western way of thinking. But I think Qazi Khalid Ashraf was the first architect who actually talked about that we are a delta, and this is a very fragile landscape. It's a fluid land. And this is where we practice, this is where we build, and there needs to be a response towards this land, and how you build here has to come from the land and not from somewhere else.
Beautiful. Now, you mentioned the first building of Mazharul Islam being this Institute of Fine Art, and it's interesting how very often a lot of an architect's practice is already in the first building, how a first building can be a kind of a manifesto. And we talked a lot about your first building, which was with Urbana, this apartment, A5 apartment, and that a kind of a lot of your later work is already in there, the sourcing of recycled materials. And what is particularly interesting about this very first building, very small, low-budget project of yours, is that there was also already there an understanding of the climate, which, of course, has been a very central preoccupation. Can you tell us about this first project?
Yeah, before I forget, I also have to mention my first boss with whom I worked after graduation. That's Uttam Kumar Shaha. He's an architect, also based in Bangladesh. And in a way, he had a beautiful apartment, which had this nice courtyard in the middle. It was on the top floor. And I loved that courtyard in this beautiful building, which was also designed by Bashirul Haq. So one of Bashirul Haq's building, and then he created this beautiful courtyard. And in a way, when we started designing this A5 apartment, it was a small 120 square meter space. And then we initiated with creating a courtyard. And that courtyard became the central space through which you can actually condition air. And one idea, and this is I'm talking about 1999, 2000, when we actually designed this project. And in a way, the whole idea was working with climate, local climate. And the building, we decided that we don't want any air conditioning. So at that point, which means that you have to create passive way of bringing in ventilation. So the courtyard actually helped. We created a double volume, so that it was a stack effect, which actually helped the entire space to be ventilated. And in those days, nobody was actually talking about passive cooling. But it felt right. It felt like this should be the future of architecture, where you're not, completely being dependent on artificial way of making your space work. So that was one of the issues. And the second thing that we were looking into was also recycling material. So everything we used in that space, starting from brick to wood, everything was recycled. We sourced it from many different places. And so that also became a major, so I think in many ways so from that point on, I'm 30 years, this is my 30th year in practice, actually. And so all this time, this is what I've been focusing on in every project, how you can make a building that does not have to be dependent on air conditioning, that can work on its own, and at the same time sourcing locally materials that you can source from the location. And it has to be a response to the climate context, also craftsmanship. I think it's also important that we employ our craftsmen and also try to revive all the old techniques of construction. So those things has become a lifelong search.
Now, obviously, we can't talk about all the work you've done over the last 30 years because otherwise it would be a marathon. But I do think that before we talk about the pavilion in which we are now, it would be good to talk about a few of your landmark projects. And I thought it would be particularly interesting in the context of the pavilion here to talk about the Beit Ruf Mosque, which actually at this very moment is exhibited also at the Venice Architecture Biennale. Just simply also, not only because it's an incredible work, but also because it's in a way a place of gathering. Because you said from the beginning that you wanted this to be not only a place of worship, but a site of refuge, of reflection, of communion, of togetherness. And you basically, in that sense, mentioned similar things about the pavilion, because of course the pavilion, Lina Gottme, when she designed the pavilion, did a table, so the idea was that she created a table here where strangers could just meet in the park and gather at the table. But this idea of coming together in the pavilion always plays a big role. So I think it would be great to hear a little bit about that project and how you managed, in a way, to make this amazing mosque a place, for reflection, communion, and togetherness, really for everyone.
Yeah, thanks. I think when you think of any kind of typology, if you go to the very beginning of it, and in many ways I think I learned it also from Louis Kahn, because he always talked about going back to the beginning. And when you go back to the beginning, you actually question how it came into being. And when you question that, you actually address the typology itself. And then you are free of all the things that has accumulated over time, which has become more ritualistic in a typology rather than the essence of it. So that's why I think when the mosque came to me as a project, and it was a commission that I received from my grandmother. So she had a land in the northern part of Dhaka, and she donated this land to make a mosque. And in that area, there was no mosque. So it came to me through her, and it was a very serious commission. I didn't get paid for it, but I got a lot of teas and biscuits and whatnot, and a lot of time spending with her, sitting together and discussing. But at the same time, designing a space like that has always been a lifelong ambition. So I was very happy to have that project. It was 2005. And at that time, my first idea was, what is a mosque? And interestingly, in our subcontinent, quite often men goes to mosque, women don't. Women has a culture of more praying at home, and whereas men go to the mosque. Nowadays, it's changing. There are many mosques which are providing space for women. But when I grew up, there was no culture of going to a mosque. So my understanding of being in a mosque, or what it feels like, is non-existent. In a way, that freed me also from all the preconception of what the space can be. So I had that possibility then to actually go back to the very beginning and to find out what is a mosque. So that's why my research started from the very first mosque that the Prophet built. And so in a way, it was basically a space to congregate, a space where people come together. So it was a larger space, which was, it started from let's say a house form, and then it was elongated to turn it into a space where everybody can gather. And it was not only for praying, but it was also a space where you would gather for different kind of activities about, it was administrative, judicial, it was communal, social. There's so many activities that used to happen in a larger space. So, but over time, it has turned into this space where people only come to pray, and then it's empty. So my idea was, how can we bring back this whole notion of coming together, use it more as a space where, it would be used by the community in many ways. And especially in the location where we were building it, it was slowly becoming a much more denser neighborhood. So because of the density, and Dhaka is one of the fastest growing cities in the world and also one of the densest cities, I knew the pressure would be so much in this area that people will not have a space where they can actually gather. So the idea was, can I turn this into a place of refuge where people can actually come together? That's why, all the symbolic aspect of the mosque was gone. There is no dome, no minaret, nothing. I turned it into a space of spirituality. So there's a lot of work with light being the only material that actually creates a sense of spirituality and gives it an atmosphere which is much more quiet and, more, let's say, how do you call it? More, more of a sanctuary. So that's how it was designed. Very low budget, so it's very elemental. It's a pavilion in the middle. So the prayer hall is actually a pavilion which is standing on 8 columns. And then the rest of it is wrapped with brick all around. So basically that's how it is.
Thank you. Another project which is exhibited right now in the Venice Architecture Biennale and at the same time also in the collection of the Museum of Modern Art in New York is, of course, your Kudibari project, which stands for Small House. It's a project you developed and actually continue to develop since 2020. And it's an incredible project of modular homes that can basically be very easily moved and relocated. And the aim of that is to really help and support communities in the delta plains to withstand the floods, which happen, as far as I understand, at least 2 or 3 times a year. And of course, Bangladesh being so vulnerable to the consequences of the climate emergency, these floods are becoming more frequent and more often. So you invented this model. So I wanted to ask you to tell us a little bit about the revelation you had to do this project and how it develops. It's kind of a prototype you created, which now continues to grow.
Yeah, well, this is a very different project from any of the works that I've done before, but it actually started from a research that we initiated in 2018 or so, and it was about the movement and the coastal areas of Bangladesh. And Bangladesh is a country which has 2/3 of delta. It's basically a Ganges-Brahmaputra hydrological system. So all the water from the Himalayas is coming down to the Indian Ocean through 3 major rivers. One is the Brahmaputra, the other one is the Ganges, and Meghna comes from the other side, which is more towards the east. And all this water, that's the glacial melt and also the monsoon rain, all the water comes down through Bangladesh and then goes into Bay of Bengal and then to Indian Ocean. And while doing this has accumulated silt, and Bangladesh is 2/3 made out of silt. And it's a very dynamic hydrological system where it's constantly shaping and reshaping itself. So which means we have land erosion, or let's say riverbank erosion, and we also have these sandbeds that form in the middle of the rivers because of this tide-dominated delta. And so what happens is that certain areas in Bangladesh has this hydrological phenomena where people has to constantly move because land is moving, rivers are moving, land is moving. So there's no constant place. So people in these areas have lived their lives in a certain way where they have to constantly move from one location to another. So every year it would be a new place where they would build their house. Or maybe if they're lucky, maybe after 5 years. So you can never tell how the land will be moving or how the rivers will change their courses. So, but when we were doing the research, it was also about how the sea level rise is impacting in these areas, how the glacial melt has increased over these years because of the climate crisis where the temperature has risen. And so basically people in these areas are moving more, flooding has increased because we are a downstream country, and we have 57 rivers coming from all different parts of India and other places, we get all the water, and that goes down into the bay. And so basically, people do not have a solution, and quite often people don't invest anything into making house, because if you're going to move the next year, I mean, who would have the energy to build a house and then to see it either get washed away or you have to move to a different location? So during the COVID time in 2020, when there was not much work in the office, we decided to create something that can we do something which would be low cost, lightweight, and something we can offer to people that they can take with them when they're moving. And could it be something simple and easy? So that's how this Khudibari project began. Khudibari means a small house. It's a Bangla word. Khudi means small, Bari is a house. So that was our small house project. And in a way, what I started with my story, what Hans was referring to, my father, and that was the time when I thought I could connect this to my idea of giving back to the society. And if we can do something for the people who are marginalized, who are actually facing the crisis, or let's say being impacted by these climate issues, and also this whole geographical and climatic challenges, that would probably be at least one way of giving back to the society who really needs it. So we started with it. There was no ambition, nothing. We just wanted to create a system which could actually help, but whether people would accept it or not, it was entirely unknown to us. So we started by building it first in Dhaka, then testing it. There was no engineer involved. It was just bamboo. We made some steel joints. We connected it, made it a space frame structure which doesn't need a lot of foundation because they have to move it. So you cannot have a heavy foundation. So it could just sit there with a very light foundation and could be easily dismantled. And we created these 2 levels so that the upper level could be useful during the flooding season, so they don't have to move away from their houses. So we considered all of that. And then we built it in the southern part of Bangladesh, in the coastal areas, for about 5 houses. And then we sought grant, and we got a grant from the Swedes Development Corporation. And with that grant, we started building in different locations in Bangladesh where they have these challenging situations where they have to constantly move. And we've built that. And since the last 4 years, we've also been monitoring how people use it, how they adapt to it. And so far, what we've seen is that they have been able to survive through the flooding, which was really great. Wherever we've built, people don't have to move away from their houses, so they can stay there in the houses without moving away. When there is this erosion, they can take the house and move it to a different location. Many of them has moved their houses also. And the way we work is we work with the community. So we transfer knowledge. So it's not us anymore. They build their own houses. So it's a system which is not so simple because it's a space frame structure. But what we've been able to give them that understanding of how to build it. So it's an entirely community-led project. And the idea was if you give a knowledge to the people, then they will be able to take it on and then make it their own. So the idea was it's an intervention into the vernacular architecture. So if the intervention really is accepted by people, then it will become public knowledge, and that would be easy for them to then go ahead and work with it. So far that's where it is. We'll see how it goes. But at the same time, this structural system can be scaled up, and we've built several of the community centers inside the refugee camps also. Bangladesh has about 1 million refugees, more than 1 million refugees actually, in the southern part where we have border with Myanmar, so we have Rohingya refugees. And in that area, we have built community centers for women. And we've also built aggregation center for women farmers who are local Bangladeshis whose livelihood got disrupted by the presence of refugees in that area. So, and these were done through World Food Program, a UN organization.
Thank you. And I think one thing which is really important is that this all happens at the cost of about £300 per unit, which means that it's really possible also for people to support this project and actually enable someone to have a house who otherwise wouldn't have a place to live.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So, in terms of US dollars, it's about $450 US per house, with the construction and everything together. Well, that's one way of looking at it, that if we can get some funding, we can offer it to people. But at the same time, we're also trying to work with people to create livelihood, to create savings groups so that they're able to sustain their own housing, so they don't have to wait for other people's funding, so that they're able to fund it themselves also. So how to bring the cost down even more than $450 is also our way of looking at it. But if anybody is willing to offer $450, we are happy to take that. Thank you.
And it got implemented in actually through the World Food Program into these different refugee camps. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you told me that it becomes multi-level structures there, and you also kind of utilize the site through that more effectively, and you want these structures from the inside be aspirational for the refugee women who then use them. So it's actually not important for you how it looks from outside.
Right. Well, the refugees from Myanmar started, a large part of them came in 2017, and they are in a certain area in Cox's Bazar, a place called Ukia, where the largest camp is, at Kutupalong camp. And the thing is, from the Bangladesh government side, they never gave them the status of refugees, so they're called the forcefully displaced Myanmar nationals, which means Bangladesh government is not responsible to look after them in that sense. It's basically the UN organizations who hold the responsibility, and the Bangladesh government actually wants them to be repatriated back to their own country. And that's why everything that you build there is around this whole idea of temporariness. So it has to be temporary structure, so bamboo, tarpaulin sheet. Basically, these are the only materials that are approved to build with. And so when we gave this idea of the Khudibari structure, which actually uses bamboo as a material, and you can use thatch, tarpaulin, you don't have to because it's a community space, so in that case they allow thatch to be built with. But it has two levels, so that became much of a problem. Bamboo is something that they allow because it's temporary. But the other materials, which is the steel connectors and then other things, took us a little bit of time to get approved through the government system. But we were able to do that. But what it does is that it's a very dense settlement of refugees, and in that area, to have two levels really helps them to double the area of space. So because of the structural system where we can have two levels, it was easier than to create a space where we could actually offer them a small garden. And we did this project through a sort of a co-design process where we worked with the refugee women, we sat with them through workshop, we designed the entire building, not the structural system, but the entire layout of the building. And when doing so, they're the ones who told us that it would be nice to have a garden. And because of that reason, these two levels really helped us. And so we built it, and now the lower levels are basically used for different kind of sessions. It's run by UNFPA, so that's a UN organization. And at the same time, the upper floor is where they generally come only to sleep. So maybe 2 hours of sleep, 3 hours of sleep, or just coming together of women, just talking to each other. So the top floor has become a space of their own. They just use it the way they want. It's a process of healing in a way from a trauma that they have acquired, and they are living in a sort of an indefinite temporariness, and you never know when this temporariness will be over. But this space gives them that sense of refuge as well.
Now fast forward to July last year is when we called you about the Serpentine Pavilion, having been so impressed by the way you bring people together, encourage interactions, convenings, conversations through your architecture. So I wanted to ask you, now that we are in the pavilion, to tell us a little bit about your first ideas. I remember that from the very beginning you talked about time in the first conversation. The artist Robert Rauschenberg once told me that in art, we talk a lot about space, but you should talk about time more. Rauschenberg described his paintings to be clocks. Can you tell us a little bit about your thoughts when you got our phone call?
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, when your first email came to us inviting us to take part in the competition, or let's say an invited competition, it never reached us because we were in an internet blockout at that point, because we were in a mass uprising in a very difficult political situation in Bangladesh at that point. So when I finally saw the email, I sent an email that, look, I'm not in a mental state of designing anything at the moment because we are not really in a good place in this country. So people are dying, and so many things are happening at this moment. So I think, and after that we had a small call and conversation. Well, finally, of course, this this commission happened, which was really nice, and thank you for this. But at the same time, I think when we started thinking about this pavilion, it has a very interesting way that this has been created over time. This whole notion of a pavilion, but it's there for a certain period of time. It's here from, let's say, June to October, and then it's packed up and going somewhere else, right? And so this really interested me, that a pavilion, and since we've been working with temporality, which is indefinite temporality, whereas this is a definite temporality, but at the same time it has this really interesting thing where people come together. Like today we're having an event in a nice, beautiful, sunny day, light coming through. This becomes a memory. It stays with you. And hopefully there will be many more of these kind of events in this space where people will come together, will have different conversations. And then I always thought that this is almost like a capsule in time, where you hold these memories and then it sort of vanishes away somewhere else. Or it just has a presence in the virtual realm now that we have that. So, all those things can happen. So that's why, it is literally a capsule, as you can see, in terms of plan and everything. And these cuts actually makes it, you go through, you see the spaces all around you, see the park through it. The park comes into the space as the wind is flowing, the light coming through. So I think, that's what was going through our mind. But when we started designing, it was also the afterlife. That's what we were thinking of at the same time, that, it's here for a certain period of time, but then the afterlife is also an important part. Where will it go? How will it be used? So our aspiration is that it should turn into a library, and it would be a beautiful library if we can turn it into a library. So let's see where it goes.
It already is a little bit of a library. If after the talk you have time, you will find some of Marina's favorite books already installed near the cafe, and obviously the library is gonna grow. Now, in terms of the sculptural kind of quality of this farm, you often spoke about the architectural language of Shamiana tents and their relationship, actually, their important relationship to Bangladesh and South Asia culture. Can you talk a little bit about how that entered the pavilion?
Yeah, I mean, as I said, that I'm always interested in the typology. And so if we talk about pavilion structure in our own landscape, we have these shamianas. And this goes back long. I think they have a history that goes back far. And it's always about creating a space which is made out of fabric, with bamboo structure, and then covering with fabric, and the facade is also made out of fabric, and quite often for weddings, for religious events. So growing up as a child, whenever we had a wedding or even a larger, let's say religious gathering like prayers, you would go to a space which is covered by this fabric, beautiful light coming through that, quite often very colorful, very ornate also. So, that's a memory that I hold, and that light coming through that space has always been very atmospheric also. So I thought, I cannot bring a shamiana here, wouldn't be appropriate, but if I could do something with light. So that's why these panels that you see, which is sort of a zigzagging, has these different colors, muted colors, that actually complements the warmth of the sunlight and daylight. So to bring that together and then to create this, sort of atmosphere which is about light, was something more of an abstract representation of my own experience of being under these spaces.
And the pavilion draws on the language of, your previous works. We talked about the mosque, the Beit Uruf mosque already, and the kind of interplay of light and shadow, which certainly connects it to that. But there's another connection which I think is very interesting, which is this communal living and also the celebration in courtyards, which we can find in another important project of yours, the Panigram Eco Resort and Spa in Yashur, which you completed in 2018. Can you maybe tell us about this connection and these courtyards?
Yeah, I think most of my works have a certain kind of a space which I think is the soul of the building or the anything that I'm creating. So for this pavilion, I think that ginkgo tree and that open space is that space where you can actually come together and just stand underneath it. The tree also gives you a certain sort of scale to that space because it is, after all, quite a monumental in that sense of its grandeur and generosity of the height and the space. Probably the biggest pavilion ever built, right? Also with maybe not the height, but the space also. So it was nice to create that central space where people can actually come together. And in most cases, I think every building has a soul, as a space, as a soul. And for me, the courtyard is always that space which actually generates that soul of a place, the spirit of the place, you can say.
Thank you. I wanted to talk also about the materials because you have embraced non-engineered timber, and in a way, it's the first time you've done that at this scale. And of course, that also means, again, that it can be reused. Can you tell us about the choice of materials?
Yeah, so at the moment here, we've used glulam, which is like laminated wood, and it's bent according to the diameter as required. The reason for using wood was also the fact that it will travel or find a home somewhere. And so the dry construction and how you can actually build it here at the low foundation and then take it out and then move it to a different location. So it's also, again, coming out of Kudibari, but it's a much larger, big bari in that sense. But the idea was also with the same thing that you can dismantle it and take it to a separate location. So basically, the wooden structure, of course, for me, first time working with wood, because wood for us is not really a material. We don't build with wood as much. Our material is generally brick. And we make concrete and brick structures in most of the cases, so it's always a different way of construction. But in this case, we used wood. And then the steel structure also holds it together, and then the panels also helps with the light and everything. So, yeah, for me, the first time making with wood.
And it is the first pavilion which moves. Because actually last night it suddenly started to rain, and then magically these two elements here came together and we had a protected space. That idea of a pavilion on the move has been always in conversation since the beginning. I remember many conversations with the late Cedric Price, who talked. He, of course, designed the aviary, one of my favorite buildings in London, the aviary with Frank Newby and Lord Snowdon in the London Zoo. And the idea is actually that building can move in the wind. I mean, initially, that's unrealized. Cedric Price wanted that building to even be mobile so that the birds could fly with it out of the zoo and be free. But sadly, Cedric passed away in 2005, so it was too late to actually commission him a pavilion. Then in 2006, we had the pavilion of Rem Koolhaas and Cecil Balmont, and that pavilion actually was balloon-like and could vertically, on a sunny day, could almost like fly away, but then we pulled it back with the strings. So it didn't fly away completely. But this is the very first pavilion which horizontally moves, because you're sitting here underneath the four vaulted segments of the capsule. Between the semi-domed walls, and it can move. Can you tell us about that idea, the kinetic dimension of your pavilion?
Yeah, I think the kinetic dimension came in because you get rain in the summer months, and so you needed a space which can actually hold about 200 people. I think here we have about 200 or a little bit more maybe, but without getting them wet. And so how do you do that? Because I wanted these cuts. I wanted people to come in. I wanted them to sort of have these apertures through which you see the tree, the wind coming through and everything. So the idea was, can we bring this part and this part together so that it can hold the people inside without getting them wet. So we created a mechanism underneath this part on both sides. And there is a switch at the back, and if you just push it, the button, it comes and connects to this portion here and gives you a space which is, without rain. So it gives you a protection. And one thing is quite interesting, which we really didn't think about, is the acoustic isn't so bad here. So that was an added advantage.
The acoustic is actually excellent, yes. And we wanted to ask you also, I thought it would be interesting to ask you, now that the pavilion is open to the public, now that we have the first public event here with all of you in the pavilion, what else you're working on? Can you tell us about, imagine we're in your studio in Dhaka, what's going on?
Yeah, well, we don't do a lot of projects at one time because we have a small office. It's about maximum 15 people. That's my size. I don't grow. Basically, it's always 3 to 4 projects at one time. So because of the uprising, we had a large project which immediately got stalled. So that's not happening at the moment. We are sort of waiting. Hopefully there will be an election, and if so happens, then we will be able to work on it. But otherwise, there is a resort that we're designing in Cox's Bazar. We are working on residential building. We have a mosque in Chittagong that we are designing. So there are several projects at the moment that's happening.
Maybe one thing which I forgot to ask earlier, which is maybe also, I think, really relevant, is the kind of connection to craft in your office. Because you mentioned your small office, and that's something, Fumiko Maki always pointed that out to me. He never wanted to have more people in his office than he can know really well. He said the beginning of the end of an architecture office for him was when he doesn't know everybody anymore. But in your office, there is a lot of presence of craft and dialogue with craft. And I was just having a conversation with Sue Fujimoto, who is our architect advisor to the Serpentine Pavilion, who designed a pavilion more than 10 years ago, and of course who designed this amazing structure in Osaka, which also is made entirely out of wood. It's a 2-kilometer diameter in which the entire expo kind of takes place. And he talked a lot about sort of Japanese craft and history of craft in relation to that wooden structure. And you talk about that a lot. There's a wonderful conversation with you and your friend David Chipperfield in the catalogue, and you've had exchange for a long time, ever since you won in 2021, I think, the Somme medal. You and David are in exchange, and you talk about the importance there of the knowledge, the embedded kind of innate knowledge of craftspeople, of artisans and masons. And you say that is something which is often ignored. It's not being credited, in terms of architecture, and they bring so much to the conversation. Can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think my interest in craft was from the very beginning when we started with this A5 project, where we brought in this people who does mosques, quite often this mosaic with broken porcelain. And we wanted to try that out to see how it works. And then we tried to find people who can actually work on it. And it was very difficult to find actually craftspeople who are still working on many of these crafts, which used to be really, one of the more important part of creating architecture. You don't see that anymore because people have moved away, or new people or new younger generation never learned the craft. So the ones who are there are very old and almost dying in a way. So then how do you create this connection? And so when we were designing the resort that you mentioned, the Panigram Resort, which was designed entirely with the local community, because we wanted, it's a location which is in the villages of Bangladesh, in the southern part of Bangladesh, where it's entirely delta, and there is no sign of architecture, what we call architecture, no sign of it. It's just people making with mud, and everything is made out of mud. So in that place, to build something was becoming quite a dilemma for us. And so we decided to work with local people, local villagers. We documented their houses, and then we started bringing in, people where they have the knowledge of still building, of many things. Like we have this beautiful roof, which is sort of a thatch roof, but it's a curved thatch, and made out of a beautiful sort of what do you call it? This pitch roof, but two pitch or single pitch, but it's a curved pitch. It's quite unique because of the rain that we have. We have enormous amount of rain, and so it really helps it to sort of get it off very quickly. And so that is, you don't see that anymore because people have moved on towards more industrial materials like corrugated sheet. And so how can you bring it back? And then, so basically that was also something that we tried to work with. So the villagers came and worked. And I thought that that was an interesting way of bringing in people for many reasons. One, you create a relationship with the new project that you are actually bringing into a landscape which was otherwise quite fine without it. But then when you're inserting something there, a relationship is important to be developed also with the locals. But at the same time, they bring in the knowledge. They also get benefited because you create a local economy around that. So all that really helped us. And I thought, instead of going more towards industrial material, it would be really nice if we could actually incorporate local knowledge, local craftsmen, local, craftsmanship, and so sort of in a way of revival also. So that I think is very important to address in architecture.
And the acoustic is actually so good that initially we were even thinking we wouldn't need microphones, but we use them anyhow for the people who follow us online. Pervin Hassan writes very beautifully in the catalogue, basically saying, modernity cancels out some part of traditional culture. Tabassum is perhaps an exception. She never cancels out tradition, but works with it and honors it while making it more relevant and contemporary. And this is amply borne out in her pavilion architecture. I think one couldn't summarize that better. I have two last questions. As you know, I'm always interested in unrealized projects. And the range of unrealized projects is very wide. Some projects are too big to be realized, too small to be realized, too expensive to be realized. Some projects are maybe also forgotten, somewhere in an analog way, somewhere in a locker in the studio, or digitally somewhere in a file in the computer. Some other projects are lost competitions. That's the reason why in architecture often projects are unrealized. Projects can also be unrealizable, utopic. Then, of course, censorship can be a reason for a project to be unrealized. And in our very first marathon in the Pavilion 2006, the late Doris Lessing, the amazing Doris Lessing, said that we should never forget that there are also projects which are self-censored. There are projects we want to do, but just simply haven't dared to do. So I wanted to ask you, within that very broad sort of scope of the unrealized, to maybe tell us about one or two of your favorite unrealized projects.
Well, I don't know if there are so many unrealized projects. They're like ghosts that's always haunting you. Every chance that you get of building something, they come and haunt you. Can I place it here somewhere? Maybe that one or this one. So I'm sure every architect who designs would tell you that. So that's there. But I think I could talk about a little bit about my dream project that I would really love to do someday. I want to retire someday. That's the plan. I would really want to retire. And then I want to become a farmer. That's my plan. And if I become a farmer, then I'd really like to have a nice farmhouse, more to the north of Bangladesh somewhere. And then, there are these beautiful people who really makes these amazing two-story mud houses. And they paint them so beautifully. And it's just unbelievable, and it's to die for. So I would like to employ some of them as architects and build my house. Maybe I would work with them also. and then to create something. And I invite all of you to come and join us at some point and come
That's
and
very
stay
beautiful.
with
And
us.
that leads us to the very last question. I see many young architects here with us today and also architecture students. So I wanted to ask you, Rainer Maria Rilke wrote this beautiful book, which is an advice to a young poet. Marina, what would in 2025 be your advice to a young architect?
I think I wrote a letter. Chris is very fond of that letter that I wrote, I think, in Architecture Review. Well, my advice, I don't know if there is any advice to give, but I think it's important to understand in what time you're living in, what are the issues that are relevant of the time, and if you really want to be relevant of the time, then you really have to address the issues that are there. And being architects, our tool is architecture. Our tool is our knowledge, our ability to, do things, create space, and also make ourselves available to people in many different ways. So reimagine the profession, reevaluate your position in the society, and do something that really is relevant.
Marina, thank you so much. A big round of applause for Marina Tabassum.